Have you ever fretted over lost sleep or wasted your time stressing about getting a bad review? If so, you're going to want to hear this episode because most bad reviews are completely avoidable. And I don't have to tell you that getting a bad review is not good for business. This is the Dog Sitter's House podcast. While it's not the end of the world, and most savvy consumers these days are forgiving of a few bad reviews, it's still no fun to wake up to, right? I mean, getting a bad review can literally ruin your entire day because I don't know if you're human like me, and if you've ever gotten a bad review, you probably reran the situation over and over and over in your head 100 times. Or maybe you go through all the stages of emotions from anger to defensiveness to, I don't know, thoughts of revenge if you really feel like you were wronged and you're really upset, you know? I mean, hopefully you don't follow through on those thoughts of revenge, but I think we've all been there, or maybe you try to brush it off as nothing you've done wrong. So, like, I'm not going to worry about that. Like, I'm not even going to waste my time thinking about that. But you find yourself thinking about it multiple times a day or worrying about losing potential customers that might see it, might see that bad review and think, yeah, scroll on, right? All of the above is completely and absolutely normal. So don't beat yourself up about it if this has happened to you. Case in point, if you have ever experienced a bad review or even an upset customer, then chances are you can relate to my client's story. You see, my client messaged me one day in pretty obvious state of stress. And she sent me a copy of the messaging that she had back and forth with a new potential customer, who was inquiring about boarding her dog. The customer described that she had a puppy and was looking for a dog sitter to board her dog in approximately like 3.5 months during the holiday season. So my client, let's call her Amy. Okay. Amy has a full roster most of the time. And I know, especially during the holidays, and she just no longer wishes to watch puppies. Okay. Which to me is one of the most beautiful things about running your own business is you get to decide who you work with. Don't you agree? So Amy simply stated that she does not book new clients for the holidays. She then explained that she would recommend the customer to another home boarding sitter, but that she didn't know anyone, unfortunately, right? So she was like saying, hey, I'd help you out, but I can't, right? But she said she'd keep her ears and eyes open for her. So, okay, that's cool. So the potential customer responded with a message stating that she would like to bring her dog for a few trial days before the trip and asked if this would solve the quote unquote new client issue. And Amy responded with, and I quote, no, I'm sorry, exclamation point. He'd have to be established here with longer boarding stays, end quote. Now the potential customer responded with one word, wow. And she swiftly went over to Facebook and Google and gave Amy a 1-star review. Now, you might be thinking that customer was just, clearly in the wrong. And I would not argue with you about that because, obviously she was triggered by being rejected and perhaps she overreacted. Okay, I can't argue with that. It does seem a bit unfair. But the truth is, when we run a business, it's our job as the CEO to mitigate potential reactions just like this. You see, it's our job to be able to foresee where there's going to be potential issues arising and do our best to make sure that they don't turn into a mountain when it's just a tiny hill. And not only that, we want to keep the end goal in mind too, which is hopefully for you, it's the same as for me, and that is to earn loyal, raving, happy, and repeat customers. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, yeah, April, it doesn't matter though. Like, no matter what you do, some people are going to leave a bad review, or that you just can't control what other people will do. And I agree. I agree with both of these statements. And I believe it's also an opportunity. Okay, so stick with me. I know it sounds a little crazy, but as a business owner, you're always going to have unfavorable situations pop up when you have to tell a customer, maybe even a long-time customer, no, or you have to let their dog go, or you have to firmly reinforce your policy. You know, it can be even more difficult to tell a potential customer no without causing them to take their anger out on your review page, like Amy's potential customer did. But the mistake that a lot of unsuccessful business owners make is not being transparent. You know, maybe they're afraid that customers won't understand or be sympathetic, but the more human you are, the more relatable you are, which evokes more compassion and understanding. So, how could Amy have been more transparent to lower the chance this potential customer would give her a 1-star review while turning it into a relationship building opportunity? There's 2 methods that I have had great success with. And in fact, I have actually fired multiple customers, told many dog owners that their dog wasn't a good fit or just behaving badly. And I've even gone so far as to kind of talk a little crazy and say to some customers, like, yeah, I have this little bit of like psychic intuitive ability with dogs, and I kind of understand when they're not feeling well, even though there might not be any symptoms to tell us that, other than like their behavioral changes, you know. And they were looking at me like I have 3 heads. Because, you know, the truth is, like, every scenario is a tough sell. I've had countless uncomfortable conversations that most of us try to avoid at all costs because we know that they can lead to confrontation or bad reviews. And the 2 communication foundations that I'm going to reveal to you today have resulted in 0 bad reviews during my 6 years of business. In fact, I have had over 100 reviews, and every single one of them, except for one, was a 5-star review. And that one exception was only a 4-star review. So that's pretty good, right? I mean, how often do you see businesses with a 99.9% 5-star review over 6 years of business with nothing less than a 4-star? And the coolest part is that this is super duper easy to do and can be turned into a positive review opportunity. Now, before I go into the 2 rules, it's paramount to note the importance of always confirming details before making any decisions. You know, for example, in Amy's situation, her inquiry had said that she had a puppy. But how many times have you known someone with a 2 or like 3 or 4-year-old dog and they still call it a puppy? Right? I mean, I still call my puppies puppies, and they're both over a year and a half old now. So if Amy would have asked for details on the dog's age and found out it was only or already 2 years old, then she may have felt differently about boarding the dog. Now, you know, on her behalf, in her case, I think that she did know someone who knew the dog already. So she probably knew it was truly a puppy, but it's just a worthy detail to mention before getting into the 2 rules. Always clarify and confirm details. because you know the saying about assuming. It only makes a beep out of you and me. So speaking of assuming, these methods are in addition to the assumption that you already provide a spectacular service, okay? One that is full of integrity, upstanding, valuable, always just on point, great customer service, like, of course, you're going to get a bad review if you don't provide a good and upstanding service consistently, right? So, everything I have to say here today is based on the assumption that you're doing that as well, of course, right? Okay. So, the first foundation to more effective communication is the alternative solution. Now, that's not like mind blowing, right? We've all heard of finding alternative solutions. So, yeah, just keep that in mind. Think out of the box. Find a way to please both your customer and your needs. For instance, in Amy's situation, she had like 3.5 months to get an opportunity to know this dog. Is it possible that she could have met the dog and offered to board him for a week before the holidays to ensure he would do well with the other dogs, like during her busy season? Or maybe she could have offered to watch the dog just a brief amount of time, or at least just meet him once so that she could get to know him and feel more comfortable about recommending him to another sitter in town, right? In the very, very least, she could have recommended a universal solution like Rover.com. Now, I know, don't be hating. I know Rover has a bad rap, and some of you might just be thinking, oh, heck no, I would never, ever recommend Rover.com. But the truth is, there are good and bad dog sitters everywhere you go. They're not all on Rover, y'all. So it's up to the customer to discern if they're leaving their dog with a good one or not. So in the very least, mention it to them, right? I mean, some people might not even know about it. Mention it to them, but back it up with some like 3 tips or something to look for in a dog sitter to make sure it's a good quality dog sitter. This can only position you as someone who cares so much about dogs that even if you can't watch their dog, you're willing to do whatever you can to help them find an acceptable solution. And trust me, I have had people thank me galore for all the help that I've given them, even though they weren't my customer. Because the whole idea is to think out of the box and see what solutions you can come up with that may serve the customer and you simultaneously. And I am a true believer that with a little time, relaxation, creativity, perhaps a shower, you always think of new ideas in the shower, or walking in nature, then we can always find a third solution. There's not always just 1 or 2 solutions or black and white. So what's perfect about this, as I think I kind of touched on this briefly already, is that you are always positioning yourself as an excellent service provider. You exemplify customer service and a genuine desire to serve the customer, even if they aren't your customer, which just displays mass integrity on your part. When customers or potential customers in this case see you doing something you don't have to do, they perk up, they take note, and you stand out in their head as somebody that they can trust. And if you listen to my podcast episode number 4, you already know that trust is the most effective marketing message that you can possibly convey. And this is why I've had many customers who were never actually customers recommend me to people who did become my customers, because they were so impressed with my ability to serve them, even though I could not accommodate their dog, that they still recommended me to new customers. The second communication foundation is my favorite. Always, and I mean always, give them a because. Have you ever heard about the copy machine study? It was done by a lady named Ellen Langer at Harvard in 1978. And it was, I don't know, somewhat famous actually, because it identified the word because as one of the most powerful words to use to drive behavior. It was pretty cool actually, because what they did is they went to, I think it was Harvard Library, Harvard College Library, and they watched for people to be waiting in line at a copy machine. And when they find somebody waiting in line, they would intentionally cut in front of that person in line who has no clue that this research is going on. And they would ask one of three questions. Okay, they'd always start out with like, excuse me, I have 5 pages. And the first question was, may I use the Xerox machine? So it was, excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine? And the second one was, excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I have to make copies? Duh. Okay. And the third one was, excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I'm in a rush? Okay. Yeah. I mean, I can see that. Like, how many people are going to be like, yeah, I'm not in a rush, and just be a good human being and say, yeah, go right ahead. I get it. I've been in a rush before. Right? So, okay, cool. The results were pretty amazing, actually, kind of shocking. First of all, they found that saying, because I'm in a rush, was 94% effective. Okay, not too surprising, right? And whereas if they didn't give a reason as to why they wanted to cut in line, it was only 60% effective. Okay, that makes sense. Actually, still a little surprising because I wouldn't have even expected 60%. But then again, this was in 1978, so hey, different world back then. But the most actual shocking part about the whole study was when the researchers said they wanted to cut in because they needed to make copies, it was still 93% effective. 93% effective. Isn't that crazy, y'all? Because even though it was an obvious, like ridiculously obvious reason as to why they wanted to cut in, what their because was, it was only 1% less effective than the I'm in a rush reason. Isn't that wild? So what they ended up concluding was that because people operate on autopilot, I dove into this deep in episode 6, I think it was, where I talk about the subconscious behavior, subconscious beliefs, and autopilot and habits and everything that our brain does, that we end up operating on autopilot 90 to 95% of the time. And by the way, if you did not hear that episode, go back, listen to it, and you'll get a link to download a free cheat sheet on the fast track to thinking and behaving like a top dog CEO so that you can design your dream dog sitting house quicker. But I digress. So what they concluded in this study was that because people operate on autopilot, that hearing the word because followed by a reason, no matter how lame that reason was, apparently, would actually cause them to comply. Isn't that wild? Now, you might be thinking, yeah, but I'm not asking my customer for a favor. I'm telling them something they don't want to hear. All right. And I get that. I totally get that. But stick with me. Because if we're telling a customer something that they don't want to hear, and we don't want them to leave us a bad review, then we basically want them to comply with our decision, right? Because if they don't comply with your reasoning, then they're more likely to leave you a bad review. But if you can get them to be sympathetic to your because, it will significantly lower their negative emotions about the situation, which significantly lowers the chances that they're going to leave you a bad review. So another rule of thumb that I always try to remember, and now this one is important, y'all, like perk up and make sure you're paying attention, because this one is so true. And it kind of rolls into what we're talking about here. And that is that people will always, and I mean always, fill in the why if we don't provide it for them. Right? If we don't provide the why, they're going to make up one themselves. And in my client's case, Amy, she didn't give a reason. She didn't give a why or a because for not accepting new customers during the holiday season. So the potential customer just filled in the blank. And she concluded the because was because Amy's dog sitting business was a 1-star service in her mind. Right? We don't want that. So always give the why or the because behind your decisions, because then you don't have to leave any blanks. You don't have to leave any room for error for that customer to fill in on their own and turn into a negative review. All right, now if this is not awesome information or like super duper cool deep psychology stuff that you can take and use in order to help you have a more smooth running business that does not get bad reviews when you have difficult conversations that you must have with customers, almost inevitably every business does, right? Then I do have something else for you. But, let me side note talk about, I am telling you kind of the psychology and the subconscious beliefs and behaviors that people have and how to use that to your benefit. So just remember, if you're using this stuff for good and not for evil, then that's awesome, right? Because if you didn't use this for good in the example that I've given here, then you could end up getting a bad review. And then what's that going to do? Especially if that bad review is unfair, right? Unjust, then could that potentially prevent other dogs from coming to your place and end up going somewhere that's not as safe or fun or amazing, right? So don't go thinking that this kind of information is immoral, because it's definitely, when used properly and keeping karma in mind, it's for the good of everybody. Okay, so let's get back to the secret sauce in addition to all of this juicy psychology that plays a role in our business, and explain that this is the perfect opportunity to make yourself and your business look even better, baby, right? Follow me, okay? Remember when I said the first communication foundation was to always find an alternative solution, even if it's not your customer, always help them out as much as you can, blah, blah, blah. And that was because it gives you an opportunity to shine by showing that you're willing to serve to your highest ability, right? Well, with this one, with the second communication foundation of giving your because, you can almost always tie your because back to a benefit for the dogs. Now, don't go making things up and lying. Just think about it. Think about what is the core reason of almost any decision that you make in your business when it has anything to do with dogs, which pretty much everything has to do with, right? Because typically it comes down to keeping the dogs safe or happy or taken care of to the best of the ability, or keeping them from being traumatized and stressed out. Don't you agree? In Amy's case, she really doesn't want to take puppies during the holiday season. And I totally get that. That's cool, right? But this was her underlying reason that she didn't really tell the customer about. And so she turned this new customer away. But imagine if instead of saying that she doesn't take new dogs during the holiday season because they need to be established already, like she did, imagine she actually said something like, I have a policy of not taking puppies during the holidays because they require a lot more attention and stimulation and activity, than I can unfortunately provide at that time because it's the holidays and I'm with my family more. And I've found that this results in puppies having a lot of pent up energy and it affects the entire pack and causes all of the dogs to be on edge or easily excited, and thereby increases the risk of a dog fight occurring. This is a completely valid reason, and it shifts the focus from you being an inflexible dog sitter to you being a wise dog sitter who puts each dog's safety first, even if it means turning down business. And seriously, what dog owner cannot respect that, right? I mean, for a customer to get so upset that they leave you a bad review for putting the dog's best interest first is like having a customer who, I don't know, leaves a hairstylist a bad review for refusing to bleach their hair because it was already too damaged and would likely all fall out. Okay. Like, why would you give someone a 1-star review from saving you from losing all your hair? But it does happen still. I get it. It does happen. Yes. But it's very rare. So the odds are definitely in your favor. And at the same time, it can make you look, and not just look, but literally help people see how much you care about the dogs and putting their safety and wellness first. Now, another suggestion that a lot of successful dog sitters do when possible is to offer to meet and greet in the future if you can't help with their current request. Okay, I've talked to people and I realize like they'll turn people down because they're booked, but they forget to say, hey, here's, why don't we get together? Here's the deal. I can't watch your dog this time, but I would love to in the future. And I'd hate for your dog to miss out on this amazing opportunity of a place to stay where they get more of a vacation than the human does often, or what my customers often say. Right. And so why don't we have a meet and greet when you come back from this trip, or just set up an appointment now? And that way we'll already have a connection and an established relationship, and we can get your dog in easier and quicker the next time you go out of town. When you apply these communication methods, you're going to see how much easier it makes uncomfortable conversations go. And when you're able to combine both methods at once, it's super powerful. And you're probably going to be surprised at the results because you'll have customers respecting you more than ever, despite giving them unwanted news. Okay, so to wrap this episode up and review, the first communication foundation is to look for an alternative or creative solution. All right, there can be a third option that isn't so obvious at first usually, so look for that. When possible, I like to take a day or two even to just let it simmer in my mind and see if I come up with something, or maybe I'm inspired with a new idea. Oftentimes just allowing the space to be enlightened is all you need to find a solution that works for both you and your customer. And the second communication foundation is to provide a because, or what I like to call your why. This doesn't mean you have to give a reason for everything. For example, if someone asks you to open up early or stay open late, and you've already clearly explained your business hours, then I don't think you always have to give a reason why. It is what it is. People don't ask, Chick-fil-A to open up on Sunday, do they? Maybe they do. I don't know. However, that said, I do find my customers have more compassion for me when I do explain why I can't budge on my hours, if we want to use that example. Especially when I link it to my needing adequate time to recharge so that I can take care of the dogs to the best of my ability. You see that? My why is always coming back to putting the dogs first, making sure the dogs have the best care possible, and so on and so forth. I know that suggesting this, like, some people in the world might be like, no, you shouldn't have to explain yourself. And I get that, to explain your why for something obvious, like not opening early, can be controversial. And even more so in the like health and spiritual, life coaching field that I used to work in. In fact, I think it was Brene Brown, the author and shame researcher, who made it popular to not give a reason for your no when you say no, because we don't have to validate our worth, right? We don't have to validate why we don't want to do something. And that's true. I mean, we don't. I agree with her in certain situations, and especially in your personal life. But I have come to shift my opinion on this when it comes to my business matters because I just no longer see my explanation as to why I have a hard open and close time, for example, as, as me having to validate my worthiness to deserve time off. Instead, I see it more as me educating my customers on what life is like as a dog sitter and how much physical, emotional, and mental energy it requires. Because I don't have to tell you that in order to be a good dog sitter, it requires proper recharge time. Except our customers are just imagining that their perfect little dogs at home who sleeps most of the day is doing the exact same thing at our house, when you and I both know that is rarely the case. So unless we're always consciously mindful in the moment, most of us see things only from our perspective. And your customers are really no different. They don't have a clue what it's like to be a dog sitter if they haven't been one themselves. They don't understand the stress of dogs constantly barking and not being able to hear yourself think, much less stay focused on what you're doing. They don't understand that it's a 24/7 job, because when a dog has to go potty at 2 a.m., you have no choice but to get up and get them outside or clean up their mess. And as much as I know that when one dog goes out, they all go out. I mean, unless you have some crated. But then you, again, have to deal with lots of barking and whining at 2 a.m. But when you are completely transparent about your behind the scenes and the reasons behind your non-negotiables, the customer can begin to see things from your perspective. And it simply makes life easier when people understand your why. So yes, give your because whenever you can. Do it in a way that's not complaining or negative, and just link it back to the benefits for your customer and or their dogs. This way you will not only significantly reduce the risk of receiving bad reviews, but you'll also build a roster of kind and considerate customers who help you maintain your sanity in this sometimes wild and chaotic business. And on that note, I think it pretty much sums it up. So I will bid you adieu and happy tails until next time.